Hello and welcome everyone back to Ruslan Bortnik YouTube channel in English. My name is James Talberg and I'm extremely delighted to be today with Professor Stephen Bronner. There has been a lot of conversations and we have seen a lot of news and publications and politicians speaking during conferences about peace initiatives, how to bring peace, how to mediate peace, and specifically about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. However, something that I think is important that we're missing here is that I haven't seen a proper structural document or a proper structural approach how to solve this conflict. What are the origins? What are the problems that originated the conflict? What is basically the root cause? So independent expert peace initiatives, a group of people that have decided to create that kind of document. So a few words about them. In short, IEPI is an interdisciplinary network whose members specialize in conflict analysis, mediation, resolution. Their expertise ranges from sociology to political science to economics and humanities, and they work in universities, institutions, non-governmental organizations, and various advisory bodies. None are propagandists or in the pay of any government, and their vita are all available on request. IEPI is committed to transparency. It is thus important to know that experts involved in the enterprise have very different political beliefs. Most likely, no contributor will agree with every statement, proposal, or suggestion of any given initiative. All of them understand that every white paper dealing with a specific conflict will synthesize many perspectives in order to provide a balanced analysis with multiple possible scenarios based on the verifiable empirical data. So IEPI came up with a product that is called white paper. And the goals of the IEPI, its white papers are intended to help providing peaceful resolution to international conflicts. They will provide clients of different sort with independent second opinions that enable them to evaluate the information that they already possess and compare with those of outsiders in order to better decide on the appropriate policy choices. IEPI is ready to cooperate with all transparent organizations committed to furthering the cause of peace. We will always provide a mixed team of experts with different views, experiences, and backgrounds, and synthesize their insights and investigation in balanced and nuanced reports in clear language that is available to nonprofit experts and policymakers seeking advice on how to resolve a conflict and make the world a better place. One of the biggest conflicts that we have today that is devastating and brought a lot of tragedy to the nations that are fighting and to the peace in the world in general. And I'm talking about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So today, Professor Bronner and I are going to present the white paper in regards to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. What is the root cause? What has happened during the conflict? And how can we potentially structurally finally solve that conflict and come to a peace? Professor Bronner, I'm delighted to see you again, and I'm passing you the stage if you may start presenting us with the white paper about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
Thank you very much. That was a great introduction, James. I'm very.
That was a long one. Sorry, it took me a while to bring everything up.
That's okay. I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm delighted to sort of direct this new network of experts in collaboration with Valerie Engel of the European Council for Democracy Development. He and I are, shall we say, in the organizers of this new network called Independent Experts Peace Initiatives, which is sponsored by ECDD and also the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, USA, that I direct. In any event, the white paper dealing with Ukraine's war with Russia is, we hope, the first of many. And we're already planning new ones down the road that deal with the position of the Baltic states in this new geopolitical context. Perhaps that will deal with Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and all the relations between them and the need for closer relations between them. And then perhaps even a white paper on Sudan and the crisis, the genocide in Sudan, which is of particular interest to me because I would say about 15 years ago, I spent time in Sudan, Darfur, and it's close to my heart. In any event, the white paper that we've developed on the Russia-Ukraine conflict is the product of a set of questionnaires, long questionnaires, detailed questionnaires, that was sent out to more than 24 scholars and activists who specialized or in some way were deeply involved in the Ukraine Russian conflict. I should say that we at ICDD USA also have a good deal of experience with the conflict. We helped, I would say, about a dozen Ukrainian NGOs, non-governmental organizations, formulate a national platform for reconciliation and unity that appeared not long after the conflict began. In any event, what we felt was the need for a more structured approach to international crises from the world of civic diplomacy. And that's the goal that IEPI, the Independent Experts Peace Initiatives, seeks to fill, to provide structured analyses of the major conflicts plaguing our world. If we think about the Russia-Ukraine conflict in many different perspectives, as presented by the variety of people from different countries, from well over a dozen different countries, who participated in our questionnaire. I should say that the responses to our questionnaire.
The questionnaire was, sorry, I'm interrupting you. The questionnaire was about their opinion about the conflict, or their opinion about the causes of the conflict, or their opinion about how to resolve the conflict?
All of the above. This was an exhaustive questionnaire. Some of the responses that came in were long article length, let me put it this way. And basically, Valerie Engel and myself synthesized the different positions to come out with a kind of balanced analysis that spoke to the root causes of the war, the sanctions that were involved, that were provided, possible scenarios that might emerge, and what might be done to further peace and help the victims of this war. The strategic options we provide are not meant to, how should I put it, impose solutions. They're rather the attempt to develop strategic options that policymakers might employ
and use.
Yes. And shall we say, influencers might consider to pressure their particular governments or representatives to act in one way or the other. We are not a political body, and nor is, by the way, ICDD USA. We are advisory. Our concern is far less with the interests of particular governments involved in a particular crisis than how the crisis is impacting the everyday citizens who always bear the cost. So,
Yes.
right, which is, I think, of some importance, because this is usually when analyses are undertaken, it's in the name of what governments, the interests of governments, rather than
Governments, big businesses, rather than regular people that, just like you mentioned before, bear the cost of the conflict.
Precisely. I think one of the things, the basic assumption on which we work is that the interest, the national interest is represented by the government, and the national interest is experienced by the citizenry, are not the same thing.
It's in a best case scenario. The government
in the very best case scenario, and in the usual scenario, there are tensions, and under the worst circumstances, the two are fundamentally opposed. And we are working between, shall we say, the semi-best case scenario and the worst when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So basically, I'm just going to give you a basic overview of what we provided. The specifics, for those who are interested, lie in the white paper, which we would be happy to send to anyone. The goal is, with respect to the white paper regarding its distribution, is that it will be sent by us and by our supporters, and hopefully by people who read it, to various think tanks, other NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and political representatives, and ministries within different governments.
In a simple word, white paper is a tool. You and your colleagues are working on a tool that can be used by people that can take the decisions, make decisions, governmental bodies, policymakers, to lead to a peaceful situation or to a peaceful resolution. As a teenager, I have realized one important thing. As a teenager, you're growing up, you're facing a lot of challenges, a lot of problems.
Sure.
And I have made myself an acknowledgement that understanding the problem is half of the solution. Same with physicians that can diagnose well the root cause of the problem or the disease is half of the solution. If we may start with explaining, explicit as we can, what are the root causes of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and later present what are the tools that those policymakers, governmental bodies can use while they understand what is the root cause to lead the nation, to lead the conflict to an end?
Sure. Well, the first thing that has to be considered in all this is Russian imperialism. Now, years ago, when President Putin first took over, he made it clear that one of his fundamental goals is to restore the standing of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Empire. And this would mean, in a certain way, recreate dominance over nations that had achieved self-determination with the collapse of communism. And in under Khrushchev, basically Crimea was given to Ukraine, and and the desire to take it back is fundamental to the conflict that's taking place today. Now, it's also true, aside from Russian imperialism, of which everyone is aware in the region, leaders of the Baltic states, civic organizations in the Baltic states, all those states that were part of the Soviet Empire are aware of it.
They understand it the best.
They understand it the best. And with regard to IEPI and also International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, all we do is advise. We know that the people who are experiencing the conflict know more in a certain way than we do. What we provide is an outside perspective that tries to be more objective, that tries to eliminate some of the emotional baggage that's attached to the conflict. For example, Ukraine has a strong tradition of nationalism of its own, and shall we say tensions with Russia.
Yes.
Right. These are cultural, they're economic, they're political. Now, in response to the threat of Russian imperialism, there's no doubt about it. NATO, shall we say, acted in a provocative manner by seeking to expand beyond Poland and reach into Ukraine and other states connected with it. Now, how should we say? This was a provocation to Russia, which of course still fears the West. But the question is the following: if you poke the bear, does that justify the bear ripping off your face? And that's the situation here. There's no doubt about it that NATO acted in a certain way precipitously, and by provoking Russian nationalism and Russian xenophobic fears.
But it doesn't justify the action. I agree with you.
Exactly. And this led to this in a certain way led to the conflict. I should say something else, though, which is rarely considered. On both sides, there has been a marked indifference and repression of minority rights. This is one of the things that our white paper strives to make clear. And it's important when doing policy, because if you think about it this way, shall we say, repressed or suppressed Russian minorities in its bordering states can act as a fifth column should conflicts arise. And in a certain way, that's what's happening in the Donbass and in Crimea. So in a certain way, any long-term, the implication is clear, any long-term solution must deal with minority rights. And it also must involve explicit collective security guarantees for both Russia with regard to NATO expansion and to Ukraine and other states with respect to Russian, shall we say, imperial aims. That is, to me, that is to us, I should say, the bedrock principles on which anything else have to be built. We might add, of course, the obvious, which is there's going to be a conflict over territory. Not just Crimea and the Donbass, but even various internal territories within Ukraine, which allow for a connection between Russia and warm water ports. Also, there's going to have to be some discussion, again, building on borders and the like, about the sale of Russian oil, which is crucial to Russia's economy. Now, speaking of that economy, if we have sort of basic causes now for the conflict.
Professor Bronner, if we may take a pause here just to elaborate a couple more things on the causes. If I understand correctly, it takes two to tango, in our case, three, because we also have Ukraine. On one side, we have the Russian imperialism. That was one of the root causes of the conflict. You've mentioned at the beginning that Putin have said that he will try to restore the influence that the Soviet Union had. I would also like to add that he also mentioned a couple of times that the fall of the Soviet Union, in his opinion, was one of the biggest tragedies in the history. So we can clearly see and say that he took on himself a mission to fix the tragedy as he sees it. From the other perspective, we have NATO expansion, as you've said, that they've been poking the bear. It's not justifying the bear, but they have clearly been doing so. I don't want to call out names, but we have a professor that is very popular on YouTube, on a media that have gave a lot of interviews lately, and he's.
Sorry, who are you talking about?
I'll tell you
I missed the name.
I'll give you the whole story and then I'll bring up the name. But he's going around and he's saying that it's actually NATO's and Western countries' fault because they've been expanding NATO when they have promised not to expand NATO after the fall of the Berlin Wall. They continue to expand it. They have been provoking Russia. They have getting closer and closer to Russian border. And therefore, because they were provoking and poking the bear, it's their fault that the conflict have arisen. And then on the third party, we have Ukraine that have basically failed at some point to try and remain neutral between these two conflicting sides, that one was poking the other and the other was not patient enough and was ready to show aggression when the poking got too painful, if we can say so. And Ukraine, instead of trying to be neutral, as you mentioned, or they have tried being neutral, but they have failed a little bit in that direction because they had the Russian minority that acted as a fifth column when the conflict became too hot. Also, Ukraine have been structurally, if I can say so, diminishing the rights of those minorities inside Ukraine that have made them even explode their anger and act even more as a fifth column. What is your take on that situation?
Well, I'm not sure there are various critiques that are going around this way. There's nothing wrong with naming names if you want to. I'm open to discussion with people I disagree with. Even amongst our experts, there was some who more or less took that position very, very seriously. My own view of this is, I guess, first of all, at the end of the day, who's to blame is a secondary question. The issue now is what to do, not who to blame. The extent to which those two questions are connected is the political question. And this, thinking about it in these terms, I think there's one very simple response to those who speak about NATO provocation, which is that Russian interference with Ukraine long predated the invasion. In any number, with any number of its regimes, or with any number of its leaders, and also with regard to its internal affairs. If you want to put it this way, you can make a pretty fair case that provocation takes place on both fronts. Now, the other thing is this. Russia was very, very quiet when the real provocation of NATO took place, which is when Sweden and Finland joined, when the crisis emerged. I mean, if you want to put it that way, if there's no question that NATO sort of sparked or Russian xenophobia and Russian fears that go back actually to the time of the Russian Revolution, when a cordon sanitaire was put around Russia during its civil war of 1918 to roughly 1920. But again, having said this, at stake now, cutting to the chase, is Ukraine's sovereignty and its right to national self-determination. If that's to be defended, then Russia must be, how should I put it?
Defeated?
I don't know if you want to say defeated, but contained. And,
or acknowledge it.
Both.
Okay.
The only way Russia will acknowledge Ukrainian sovereignty in this regard,
it's if it's contained.
Exactly. And it seems to me also that one can go back and forth about appeasement, which was the policy that led to the elimination,
World War II.
Yeah, and led to the elimination of Czechoslovakia, handing it over to the Allies. Basically, handed it over to the French and the English Allies. Basically, handed it over to Hitler in the hope that this would produce peace. Now, there's much discussion about how this is relevant to the present conflict in terms of motivations. If we get soft on Russia, will this only increase its imperialist designs for other countries? I think there's a step in between. Namely, if one simply cedes Crimea, Donbass, and various internal territories, will the same thing happen to Ukraine that happened to Czechoslovakia? Which is what Hitler did, was move from taking a part of Czechoslovakia to taking the whole pie. Will this occur to Ukraine as well? That's the question. And that's why collective security is such an important issue. At the root of the problem, in my view, from Ukraine's standpoint, is how is its sovereignty
maintained?
And the principle is not simply to oppose Russia. The principle is, how do we defend the right of national self-determination? And that is an important question. In my view, the crucial question. Russia's xenophobia, you can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, claim we are the dominant power in the region, focus on Ukraine as in terms of NATO expansion, and then ignore as you wish, ignore the entry of Sweden and Finland into NATO.
That's a brilliant point, Professor Broder. I would like to elaborate a little bit more on that, because so first of all, in terms of the names, the professor that is giving interviews and blaming NATO and Western countries for the conflict in Ukraine is Jeffrey Sachs. I love his lectures and I've been watching him for a very long time, but I'm a little bit terrified by his brutal position in regards that it's only West to blame for the conflict. And then, as you've mentioned before, yeah, they could have poked the bear, but the bear have decided to take an action. So it's clearly not justifying the bear. And what kind of, when I was watching these videos and interviews when he was giving them, I was asking myself, how can I oppose that perspective? Because it wasn't clicking in my head. And what you've mentioned, that's basically in opposition to his theory, is that if NATO is the problem in terms of its expansion, and that's what have led to the war, because this is the biggest provocation as Russia tries to portray it, why haven't they reacted when Finland and Sweden have joined? Because that's a clear provocation when probably over 1,000 miles of your border is now with a direct confrontation with NATO.
These are much stronger nations, and they're in NATO now.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, one can't, I think, ever simply take dictators at their word, or aspiring dictators at in the case of some Western leaders, at their word. The national interest in national security, as defined by dictators, is simply what they define the national interest to be.
The way they view it.
Yeah, because they can enforce it. So if you want to place particular emphasis on Ukraine, you will do that. If you want to place particular emphasis on Sweden, Finland, you can do that too. That the point that I think is so important is that the focus is simply on Ukraine.
That's brilliant. So just a simple question, why Ukraine has fallen to be a victim? Why specifically Ukraine?
Yeah, and I think the answer here is primarily symbolic. And on the one hand, this was
specifically for Putin.
Yeah.
Or for Russia itself as well, Russia. From history perspective.
It was part of the Soviet Empire, whereas Sweden and Finland weren't. That's the cultural political issue.
So they take it personally.
Yes. Second thing is the very basic geopolitical matter that it stands in the way of Russia's traditional concern with gaining access to warm water ports. And that's something that goes back to Peter the Great. That's been a constant of Soviet policy for 200 years or more. So that's in there. And the third thing, I think, is not so much the, shall we say, the military threat that Ukraine poses, especially now. The threat is also of a purely economic nature. And the smart move, I think, would have been in the beginning. I mean, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but if basically Ukraine had taken a position, we're willing to step back from NATO, but rather come closer to the European Union in terms of economic connections. That might have been the kind of compromise that would have saved everyone a lot of
years.
Yeah. But I think that, the goal, when one speaks about the causes, is in each case to link the economic with the political with the cultural. And then you can come up with some kind of coherent perspective on what took place.
I think we have, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, and the next step, of course, is how the opponents of Putin should respond. I'm sorry, though, I interrupted you.
No, I mean, I think we have a clear understanding of the root causes. I'm just going to name them again if I remember everything in order. One is that we had the Russian imperialism, and we also have specifically Putin himself that thinks that the fall of the Soviet Union is the biggest tragedy in the Russian history, in the Soviet Union history. So he took on himself a mission to restore. On the other hand, we have NATO and their so-called provocation. But then again, we clearly see that that's not the case with Sweden and Finland, at least from the Russian perspective. And that leads us to a historical perspective that Russians just see Ukraine as part of its history. They think that Ukraine has to be under their influence, and therefore they're willing to sacrifice and work on that direction more than if they would go for Finland and Sweden. Then we have Ukraine that has basically failed to remain neutral, because Ukraine would prosper and thrive as a neutral state, as a logistical hub between the West and the East.
Exactly.
And we probably also have more minor challenges, such as they're minor from the perspective of the history and culture. They're not minor. I'm just calling them that way because in a perspective, it's minor. That Russia basically became weaker. You can only be provoked to attack somebody if you're weak. If you're staying strong and you're being provoked by a little dog that is barking extremely loud and threatening to bite you, but you're like, okay, keep going, you're still a small dog. So if Russia was indeed strong, as they claim that they are, indeed a dominant player in the region, I don't think they would be threatened much by expansion of a NATO or an increased military opportunities in Ukraine, because they would still, they wouldn't see it as a threat. I might be wrong, I might be confused here, but that's just my perspective.
There's truth to that. I do think, though, that one of the mistakes we make, that the West has consistently made, and if I were Jeffrey Sachs or Rick Wolff or John Mearsheimer, I would emphasize this more, is that Putin's position has support within Russia. I think this has been radically underestimated.
That's another great point. I have always arguments about that. Like a lot of people blame Putin for what is happening, but I'm saying, but hey guys, pause for a second. He's supported by his nation.
Indeed. And we hear about these demonstrations, which are, let's admit it, basically small in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Russia is not composed of Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Absolutely.
The support that he gets comes from the outside. From precisely the people who are fighting the war, if only in defense of their, or as a way of legitimating the sacrifices that have been made.
That's usually all. That's usually always the case when you have the capital and the big cities, that they have more liberal and higher level of pluralism, and then you have the outscores in the deeper part of the country that they're more conservative, patriotic, and they're willing to take the sacrifices. Yeah.
It's very important also historically to consider Russia did not have, let me use the old terms, either a full-scale enlightenment, as in Western Europe, nor a serious bourgeois revolution. In other words, it went from the Tsarist regime, for all practical purposes, beginning now the provisional government that emerged under Alexander Kerensky, it went directly towards Lenin's dictatorship of the proletariat. And this is not a country with a strong democratic tradition. And I fear that when you don't have a strong democratic tradition, what you usually have is a commitment to dictatorship that is backed by populist nationalism or xenophobia, and that deserves to be considered. This is completely missing in the criticisms that
John and Jeffrey provide when they speak on
Yeah.
the interviews. That was the missing part for me, at least.
Yeah.
But we are where we are today. We have the conflict. We have the full-scale war. We have now international players that are involved in the conflict. I'm referring to North Korea that is sending soldiers, and Russia lately officially have said that we do have North Korea as our ally participating in the war. Ukraine has.
I want to say just quickly one more
Yeah.
thing that speaks to the aims of both sides. If Russia wants a neutral Ukraine, which it clearly does, I mean, this is one of the points that Putin has raised, then it has to be willing to cede on the question of collective security. I mean, to become a neutral state without a military and without collective guarantees of security.
It's a recipe for the end of the nation.
It's ridiculous. No government can accept that, which is the way the entire peace discussion has gone so far, and one of the reasons it hasn't gone anywhere. This seems to be something that the Trump administration in particular has been, thoroughly blind to.
They're missing it. They're missing that part. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the only pressure that's really been applied on Russia is twofold. One, military support has been given by Europe, by the democratic states, by the West, to Ukraine, which is never enough, if I can put it this way. No matter how much.
Or the timing.
Yeah. The point in some way was, and this was something behind President Biden's policy, that you make the promise, but you're slow to deliver on the military.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In order to prevent, shall we say, or to prevent the unleashing of escalated attacks.
The Ukrainian government is pretty vocal about it. They've mentioned multiple times that it's not enough and it's not early enough.
And this is an enormous mistake. I mean, I've been to so many conferences and meetings where I've heard officials of the Ukrainian government speak, and it's almost all they say constantly is, well, there's this threat of dictatorship and we need financial or military support. It's sort of a policy based on guilt and gimme, gimme, gimme. And that's not going to work. That has its limits. And
that we can see now.
Yeah. But that's something, if I could say so, that's something that the Ukrainian government should have seen from the beginning. What I think is amazing is that the Ukrainian government had no plan B. That is to say, what happens when America steps back? What happens when military aid is cut?
I would even add into that, it's not just missing plan B on top of that, it's also just missing a strategy as a whole. It's more of like a tactical approach here and now.
Yeah, and this is, if I can say so, is inexcusable. If one takes a political position, one has to in some way be responsible for the options that are taken and ignored in dealing with a crisis. And here is where, in my view, the critique of Ukraine comes in. less so with regard to NATO, or the United States, which, if I can say so, was in an impossible position. To be fair, on the one hand, there was a need to stem or contain Russian imperialism. On the other hand, there was a need to prevent using its own military forces, which would have meant the essential overthrow of any government that tried that in the next elections. And in lieu of sending military troops, having an open checkbook on military and financial aid. You can't do that forever. You can do it for a while, but you can't do it forever. And in a certain way, were it not that this completely impedes the sovereignty of Ukraine again, I understand President Trump's desire to stem the outflow of funds, and for the United States to get something tangible back. Where the problem resides with this current deal over minerals in Ukraine, I think here too the Ukrainian government. This goes beyond the white paper, of course. I think that the Ukrainian government doesn't know what it's dealing with, which is namely basically a real estate guy from New York who's made his reputation on making deals and essentially just not following through.
That's a fascinating part, Professor Bronner, because I'm actually amazed by the conferences or the responses that he gives to the media after the conversation that he had with Putin or other officials.
Imagine the following: you're going to build a building. So, in order to build that building, you order some cement. The cement comes, you start to use it, then the cement manufacturer gives you a bill for the cost of the cement, and you simply say, "I'm not going to pay it." What do?
That's one perspective. Absolutely, I agree.
This is the career of Donald Trump.
We have indeed can find evidence to that on many documentaries, movies that have been created about Donald Trump.
And this is my fear of what will happen with Ukraine, with his policies.
And going back to Witkoff, I just want to mention every time that I can hear him speaking out of his conversations or negotiations that he's coming out of, I can't hold myself but to have this sense of understanding that he's blind to the root cause of the problems that he's trying to fix. And the last example is when, after his last conversation with Putin, he said, we're very close to finalizing a deal. And it's all about the 5 regions that are partially, Crimea is fully, the other are partially controlled and occupied by Russia. And the problem is just around those 5 regions. He's just not acknowledging the whole piece that we just talked at the beginning about the imperialism, about the provocation, about NATO, about Ukraine not doing its best to maintain neutrality. He's just missing this whole part that is the foundation to the conflict and saying, oh, it's all about these 5 regions. And if we can negotiate a deal there, the conflict will resolve itself. No, it's not, because that's not why the conflict started.
If that presupposes, of course, that the issue for him is the conflict rather than the minerals. Yeah. And that is an assumption that dealing with Trump can't be made. Indeed, there's been a crude character to much of the West's response to to the crisis, and that is the sanctions. Now, this is a very complicated area. There are numerous levels of sanctions, numerous forms that sanctions can take. But for our purposes, there is the difference between sanctions that sort of indiscriminately target all citizens, which, by the way, actually strengthen the Russian regime, and sanctions that would target military and energy sectors of the economy. We tried to make that clear in our white paper, and that sort of close the financial loopholes that benefit oligarchs. Let me give an example of the difficulty of what's involved. There are such things as dual purpose sanctions. In other words, any object that can benefit the military will be sanctioned, will be boycotted. So let's say you want to import pens. Pens can obviously be used by the military. So you sanction pens. But of course, every citizen uses a pen at some point. So while you're thinking that you're sanctioning the military, you're actually sanctioning all Russian citizens. And that is the disaster of the sanctions. These have been employed in a very crude fashion. The use of sanctions tends towards this kind of crudeness. And if one's going to, this would be a sort of advice, if one's going to employ sanctions, they have to be the proper sort. And the sanctions that impact ordinary people are what must be eliminated. I don't think there's any choice in that.
I agree. Yeah.
And it seems to me that one of the things that is also wrong with the blame argument or the poor Russia position is the victims. The victims stand at the center of the discussion, not the interests of Zelensky's government or Putin's government. What we have now is a situation where more than 1 million people have been killed or wounded. And this distinction between the military and civilians, this is where it becomes somewhat arbitrary. 1 million people lost already. And this is aside from the destruction of the infrastructure of Ukraine. I mean, it's complete rubble. And the thousands of children that have been evacuated to Russia, and the ecosystem that's been destroyed, and quite frankly, the use of rape as a tool of war, which, by the way, is itself not something unprecedented. This is something that was well known, that occurred at the end of World War II when Russia invaded Germany. I know any number. I have any number of friends who were from the East Germany.
Eastern Germany, yeah.
Yeah, and every single one had someone in their family who was raped. I mean, this is not simply a feminist issue. This is a human rights issue, and this is something that's as unacceptable as the evacuation of the children. And what this means is, in my opinion anyway, is that if we're talking about reconstructing Russia, the first first thing that must be done, and this is one of the points that we raise in the white paper, is that the victims receive free counseling, free and therapy at women's centers and civic clinics, that they receive free burials and the appropriate health care, and above all, compensation for what they've suffered. This is not impossible. Compensation was also given by Germany to
Jews and other nations that have suffered.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that's a great point, that a conflict, to achieve its final resolution, have to end with compensating the victims of the war and of the conflict.
Yeah.
And not just compensating, but also acknowledging and not diminishing the pain and the suffering that they have been going through.
I'll tell you, the most difficult issue of, in a certain way, the conceptual issue that ICDD USA faces is making clear that the victim is not the government. The victim is
the ordinary people.
And this is not a matter of talk. Oh, the Ukrainian people are suffering, therefore we must save them through countering Russia. If one takes that seriously, that the Ukrainian people are the ones who have suffered the most, then something must be done to not simply alleviate the suffering, but to compensate people for the suffering that they've had. And in this regard, the West and all the nations involved have been thoroughly.
They're throwing a blind eye on it.
Yeah, and we can't have that.
If we can mention, we've mentioned already, one point is the acknowledgement of the suffering and the victims. What other points are important to mention that are part of the white paper to resolve the conflict and to achieve a final resolution that can be advised to policymakers, to politicians that make a decision, and maybe even for ordinary people to understand what part they have in that conflict to resolve it and to move forward?
I think the first step, if I can put it this way, is that there can be no winner. Both sides will prove losers in this war.
Absolutely.
It's a tough thing for governments to accept,
to acknowledge while you're fighting,
and for people to recognize who have paid such a high price. It seems to me, some of this I already mentioned. I think the first is any solution to the conflict must involve collective security guarantees, both for the sovereign state of Ukraine and for Russia, with respect to its borders and for possible future incursions of NATO. And this has to be explicit. This cannot be the way the Trump regime has brought this up. Oh, well, yeah, we'll defend Ukraine. Yeah, you'll get your collective security.
Or like J.D. Vance said, we want Ukraine to remain sovereign.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
What does it mean? It means that there's going to have to be international monitoring of borders, and I think there'll have to be something that ICDD USA has suggested in the past, which I think is part of the discussion now. There has to be a no man's land separating Russia from Ukraine. I don't see any other way to do this. It'll be difficult for citizens who want to move back and forth, but this is what it is.
At least temporary.
At least temporary, yeah. But I don't think we should fool ourselves. Temporary is going to last a long time.
Just like with the Berlin Wall and on any other historical resolution that we saw in the past.
Exactly. And the The second thing is, I think there's going to have to be monitoring of the rights of minorities.
And this is something that Ukraine has to obligate itself and
as well as Russia. That's right. That's right. And I think also that, I hate to say it, but Ukraine probably will have to give up some territories. Crimea, which is mostly Russian speaking, and probably parts of the Donbass. I don't see it as possible to avoid that. Maybe it is, and this piece of advice will go by the boards. But it seems to me that this is the way it is now. The question is, what does Ukraine get back to that will allow for the retention of its sovereignty? And it seems to me that the first and most basic way is to
join EU
guarantees to rebuild it. Because if money has been wasted and geopolitical support has been wasted in regard to the West supporting Ukraine in the war, this is going to be child's play compared to rebuilding it. The reality is also that, and I don't think that's appreciated enough, both governments need to save face. And they have to show themselves, willing to sort of sell the compromises necessary for peace. Yeah, that is not an easy business. The final thing is, on the broader level, global level, is there seems to, I think that all participants at some level need to be engaged in the process, perhaps at different levels of negotiation. That's open. But it seems to me quite clear that two blocks are forming with planetary geopolitical power. One is the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Had President Trump engaged in an intelligent foreign policy, it would have been, try and separate China from Russia, or Russia from China, which is giving Russia enormous support. Separate, and if you like, try and make compromises with China at the expense of Russia. Instead, the Trump administration has done the exact opposite. It's made peace. It's trying to sort of align itself with the weaker party and compete with the stronger party. Why is an open question, but I think that's what
I think I can just add into it, and you correct me if I'm wrong. President Trump and the team of President Trump, they went further. They have even made a split inside the Western coalition.
Yes.
So
that's what I was going to say. One of the things that must be repaired is America's relationship with NATO and the EU, and B, it's going to be a very difficult task. Splits within the European Union will need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved fast. Now, it is impressive that four presidents have made the trek to speak with Zelensky, which is impressive. I know also that Hungary is, shall we say, reflecting on its uncritical support for Russia. All the better. But what is necessary is to move from the implicit to the explicit. In other words, if we're going to talk about geopolitics, it's necessary to be clear about what the interests and positions of the sides are, because anything else can lead to global instability. One of the most dangerous things about the Trump administration so far is its unpredictability. The way it has shifted its support from one side to the other in the conflict. Now there's talk about sanctions on Russia. Is it realistic? Is it possible? Again, that remains an open question. But the very idea of raising it makes it unclear what the regime.
What is the direction?
Yeah. So that I think is necessary. It seems to me also Europe will need to, under any circumstances, build its own defensive capacities,
which it seems like they're working on.
Which they're working on. It's a very tough enterprise because they are under. It's clear one of our experts, Dr. Attila Demko, is really an expert on. Is a principal expert on defense strategy. He's from Hungary. And he's made clear to me that Europe is drastically unprepared. They're trying to compensate. Germany is expanding its budget.
I just want to mention that they have increased the debt seal to invest into the military capacities.
Precisely. It's very impressive how up you are on all this.
Thank you.
It's okay. In any event, and I think for the moment, the crucial thing is not a 30-day ceasefire. This is looking at the wrong thing. What's necessary is a freeze in the conflict. This is not simply a step-by-step process. This is something that takes a certain boldness, both in the proposals for peace and the interests in peace, because it's not yet clear how these are to be articulated. The need for a new global security structure to deal with these blocks in conflict, as well as Ukraine and Russia. In fact, I think the conflict between Russia and Ukraine symbolizes the broader conflict or the broader opposition that's taking place between the nations of BRICS and democratic nations of the West. The final point is, and this is where I think NGOs, non-governmental organizations engaged in civic diplomacy, really have a role to play. It seems to me that on a certain level, both sides, the Ukraine with its intense nationalism and the Soviet Union with its imperialist ambitions, both sides seem to remain captive to outmoded ideological narratives. It's incumbent upon NGOs to begin to dispel those. That's certainly what we're trying to do. And in order to do it, that's exactly why we need, I think, a new network capable of providing independent experts peace initiatives. That's how I see it. Any of your audience that's interested in receiving materials, they should contact me or and at Bronner, SE at gmail.com. We'll be getting I'll be getting new emails and a new email address shortly, but that's the best place to contact me now. And I'm happy to send these materials to anyone. Also, I hope that those listening to this program who are interested in IEPI learn more about it, and that they'll help in spreading the message, that they'll send our materials to their own contacts, think tanks, political representatives, with an endorsement. We would be very grateful.
What we're going to do is that in the description, I will add your contact details. I will mention how to reach out to you and what is the purpose and the goal of the white paper. And we will try to, spark the movement to spread the word and share that knowledge with as many people as possible. Another thing that I would ask Ruslan, if we can do that, is to translate that interview into Russian or Ukrainian or both. And I would like to take that opportunity and to bring a little bit hope for Ukrainians. I can see a lot of hopelessness and devastation because of the war and the lack of vision for the future. And that fears me. A lack of vision is probably the worst state that a mind of a person can be. If we may, I would like to portray with you what could a successful, prosperous, strong Ukraine could and should look like in terms of how should Ukraine inside its own country and territory respect its minorities? How should Ukraine act on a geopolitical level? How should Ukraine act in terms of the finances, economy, military, from like logistics, from all these perspectives? I'll give my own introduction, and then you correct me if I'm wrong or if there's anything that we can add into it. Is that, in my opinion, Ukraine as a country, to be successful, have to be a logistical hub. It has to be a country that wins on a cooperation between the East and the West, some sort of a new Switzerland that can represent the Western interest in Ukraine, represent and balance the Russian, the Chinese interest in Ukraine, and win on that geopolitical balance and export-import, if we may say. In regards to minorities, Ukraine is a very multicultural nation, at least used.
If I can interrupt for 1 second, James, that is a wonderful way of talking about it, a new Switzerland, with this proviso. Switzerland, of course, has the tradition of neutrality, which is implicitly and explicitly recognized by everyone. Ukraine won't have that. And in lieu of that, it will need collective security guarantees, as will Russia. It's unimaginable to have this new Switzerland without those guarantees, in my opinion. And then it will remain open. If I can take another step that's necessary to secure support for or recognition of the minorities, elections have been suspended, and many excuses have been made for that suspension. The war, the extreme urgency of the crisis, and so on. That, to me, is a mistake. Every country in crisis uses the crisis, every government of a country in crisis uses the crisis to strengthen itself. If you're going to talk about the rights of minorities, you have to talk about a freely elected government that can enforce those rights. The only government that enforces universal rights that I know of is a liberal republic, and a liberal republic has regular elections. Without that, this becomes impossible. And for the financial aid, this is going to be a very difficult negotiation. We have to recognize it. I do want to say one thing, though. You're absolutely right about the hopelessness and lack of vision. Lack of hope is not a political stance. You can think about what you do under the worst circumstances, but without hope, you have no options. You have no, shall we say, impulse or inspiration to act in a positive political manner. The old slogan, keep hope alive, is real. And it's easy to say from the outside, but this might be the biggest challenge facing the Ukrainian people.
Professor Bronner, it was a privilege to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure, James, and I appreciate immensely the intelligence and the clarity of your moderation in our discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.